Hello everyone, this is your quiz review video for your quiz on short-term managerial decision making. It's chapter 25 on Pearson Labs. In the first question we have Sunrise microwaves, and they make two different types of microwaves. They make industrial models and they make household models. Well, Sunrise went through and they broke down their income statement last year between the two different models. We have all of the revenues and expenses associated with each model respectively, as well as the total revenues for the company as a whole. And as we can see here, the industrial models had an operating loss of $40,000. Sunrise probably isn't happy that they have a line that's not contributing operating income to the business, so they're thinking about ditching it. And when you ditch a product line, well, all of the variable costs go away because variable costs change with the level of production that you have. So if you're not making any industrial model microwaves, you don't have to pay for any of the metal or any of the wiring that goes in there, nor any of the labor. All of your variable costs are gone because you're not making them. However, fixed costs can persist. They can stay. If you have a facility that's on a nice big piece of property and you decide you're going to stop using that facility to make these industrial microwaves, you can't say to the local government, well, we're not going to make industrial microwaves anymore, so we shouldn't have to pay our property taxes. It doesn't work that way. So you can't get out of all fixed costs, though there are some that you can. Maybe for getting rid of workers. If you're laying off people, you would pay less in insurance. That's an unavoidable version of fixed costs. For whatever rationale they got here, Sunrise thinks they can get out of $95,000 worth of fixed costs if they get rid of industrial models. $83,000 of this is related to their cost of goods sold, and $12,000 is related to their selling and administrative expenses. What they're going to do to figure out if it's a good idea to get rid of these industrial model microwaves is perform a differential analysis, which tells them how their operating income, how their income statement is going to change between their two different decisions to continue making the industrial models or to get rid of them. So, first things first, they need to figure out what their decrease in operating income is going to be. Expected decrease in revenues if they get rid of these industrial models is going to be a decrease of $340,000. As we can see on our income statement, that's the sales revenue which was attributable to the industrial models. What's the decrease in their variable costs going to be? Well, the industrial models have $35,000 in variable costs related to cost of goods sold, and they have $66,000 in variable costs relating to selling and administrative. They probably don't have to, say, promote these if they're not going to make them anymore, which would decrease the variable cost of selling expenses. Add those two together, it's a total decrease of $101,000. What is their decrease in fixed costs? That's given in the information. $95,000 in total. $83,000 which can be attributed to COGS, and $12,000 which can be attributed to their selling and admin costs. So in total, if they get rid of these industrial models, it's going to decrease their cost by $196,000, which means that their decrease in operating income, found by taking the decrease in revenues minus the decrease in costs, is negative $144,000. So yes, the operating loss is there for industrial models, which isn't good. But if they stop making these industrial models, they're still going to have to pay a bunch of these fixed costs, and their total loss will be actually worse than if they didn't make the models. So they should continue to make these industrial models, even though they are operating at a loss right now, because if they get rid of them and go just to the household models, they're going to have to pay most of the fixed costs that are related with that industrial model still. So their loss is actually going to be way, way worse. So for a differential analysis, if you have a decrease in operating income from your differential analysis, that's no bueno. That means that you should not take option B. In this case, you should not discontinue the industrial models. Let's prove it with a contribution margin income statement. And this is going to break down our revenues and expenses in a little different format than I think you've seen before. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take our revenues minus our variable costs to get to our margin, and then subtract our fixed costs from our contribution margin to get to our operating income. So let's start with the with industrial models column of our contribution margin income statement. If we continue making the industrial models, what's our sales revenue going to be? Well, it should be the same as our total, because we'd still be making both models, the industrial and household models, which means we'd have $710,000 in net sales revenue. Our variable costs would be $84,000 for manufacturing, and if we look down there, we see we have $143,000 in variable costs from selling and admin. We would have total variable costs of $227,000. Contribution margin is sales revenue minus variable costs, so $710,000 minus $227,000 means we would have a contribution margin of $483,000 if we continued to make the industrial models. For fixed costs, for manufacturing, we would have $309,000 in fixed costs related to our cost of goods sold, our manufacturing section, and we would still have the $66,000 in fixed costs relating to selling and admin for a total fixed cost of $375,000, giving us operating income of $108,000. It's the same thing as the total section, just reworked, just putting all of your variables in one section and all of your fixed in one section instead of separating it from cost of goods sold and selling and admin. Moving on to what happens if we get rid of these industrial models. Well, what's going to happen to our sales revenue? Well, we'd only be selling the household models, which means we would expect only $370,000 in sales revenue, because we'd be getting rid of the industrial models and the $340,000 that came with it. So we can just take the sales revenue, which is attributable to the household models from last period. For our variable costs, all we would have still going is these household models. So our manufacturing variable costs would be $49,000, and our selling and admin variable costs $77,000, giving us total variable costs of $126,000. And contribution margin again is sales revenue minus variable costs, $370,000 minus $126,000 equals $244,000. For fixed costs, it's not quite as easy as moving the numbers over from the income statement. Why? Because we can't get out of all of the fixed costs. We can only get out of $83,000 of fixed costs related to manufacturing, related to our cost of goods sold, and $12,000 of fixed costs related to selling and administrative expenses, so $95,000 in total. What would we still have? Well, we can figure that out pretty easy. If we take what our total fixed costs were for the last period, subtract out the portion that we can avoid, that would be our estimated remaining fixed costs. So for manufacturing fixed costs during the last period, we had $309,000 of fixed costs in the cost of goods sold section, and our information tells us that we think we could avoid $83,000 of them if we discontinued the industrial models, which means $226,000 of those fixed costs would persist. For selling and admin, our costs in total last year were $66,000 in fixed costs for selling and administrative. We think we could avoid paying $12,000 of those if we discontinued the industrial models, which means our remaining estimated fixed costs should be $54,000. If we add together our fixed costs related to manufacturing and our fixed costs related to selling and administrative, that's $280,000. So if we have a $244,000 contribution margin and we subtract out our $280,000 in fixed costs from that contribution margin, that means we would have a loss of $36,000. So what is our differential now? If we get rid of the industrial models, our sales revenue is going to go from $710,000 down to $370,000. That is a difference of $340,000. Our variable costs, well, they decrease by $35,000 if we got rid of the industrial models, and our variable costs related to selling and administrative would decrease by $66,000. In total, our total variable costs would decrease by $101,000. We would expect our contribution margin to decrease by $239,000. For fixed costs, we would have a decrease in fixed costs related to manufacturing. Our cost of goods sold fixed costs would decrease by $83,000. Our selling and admin would decrease by $12,000, and our total fixed cost would decrease by $95,000. That number should always match what's given in the information. That's what we think we can avoid if we got rid of these industrial models. So those numbers work out. So operating income or loss, our contribution margin was $239,000. We have fixed cost that's going to be a $95,000 decrease. What is going to be the decrease of our operating income? Well, it's not going to be pretty, right? If our contribution margin is going down at a faster rate than our fixed cost is going down, that means that our operating income is going to decrease by $144,000. I got that from $108,000 down to negative $36,000. That's $144,000 difference. So again, Sunrise Microwaves should not get rid of the industrial models. Yes, it's unprofitable. Their business will actually be worse off if they stop making them, because at least they have a positive contribution margin at this point, which is contributing to covering at least some of those fixed costs.